Today we hear in Luke's Gospel the story of the Good Samaritan, which all of us are familiar with. This story of how there was this individual who was robbed and left for dead on the side of the road, and three people passed by. Two of them looked the other way and didn't pay attention, but the third, the Samaritan, was the one that had compassion on the individual and cared for this person. And also, not just cared for them in the moment, but took them and saw that care was given to them for a period of time. I'm reminded of a poem that was written in the late 19th century, and it was called something to the effect, I don't remember the title exactly, but it's a poem about if Jesus were in London town. And the story or the poem kind of proceeds by talking about kind of the trials and things that took place in London, the difficulties, the poverty, and so on and so forth at the time, and how Jesus, as he was in his poverty on Calvary, is that people looked and one said, truly, this one is the Son of God, and hearts were touched and hearts were moved. And the poem itself, it ends as a very striking commentary on the current situation by saying if Jesus were here today, he would long to be back on Calvary's hill because compassion existed much deeper on Calvary than today. It's a very striking, very, very powerful social commentary poem. But as we hear today, Jesus invites us to reflect on the role of the Samaritan and the role of that individual that cared for the Samaritan through the question that's asked earlier on in the gospel, who is my brother? Or rather, who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? We should ask ourselves, what's the fundamental difference between the Good Samaritan and those two religious leaders who passed the man left half dead on the side of the road? Some might say that those two leaders put the law above the needs of the victim. Well, the Samaritan responded with compassion. But it's important for us to recognize that treating others with compassion is also a part of the law of God. And so perhaps even a little more fundamentally, it's been said that those two religious leaders deliberately kept their eyes and their hearts closed to the man in need. We hear this by they walked on the other side of the road. Now, the commentaries seem to suggest that maybe they walked there out of fear that they would have to do something that inconvenienced them for their own plans. And the commentary suggests that the inconvenience would have been that they wouldn't have been able to take part of their own ritual. You see, it seems to suggest that they were on their way to offer some sort of temple ritual service. And so, according to the law, they had to remain ritually pure. But perhaps if they dared to walk directly past the man, they too would have been moved with compassion and thereby filled with the law that says, love your neighbor. God himself reveals his laws in many ways. As we can see from the readings today, Moses points that out in the book of Deuteronomy. That God has made it relatively easy for people to know and to understand his laws because he planted them in our own hearts and in our own mind, rather than at some great distance. Notice that at the end of the first reading, you don't have to go anywhere to experience the law, to know the law, but it's written right in our hearts. So we're reminded that God's law is so close to us, we only have to just carry it out. God also revealed himself to us through Jesus, who is the very Word of God, as Paul reminds us today and tells us in that second reading. Jesus is the very image of God. He came down to earth and spent more than 30 years with us to put a human face on the mysteriousness of God. And he did this so that we can know both the incredible love and forgiveness of God, and also the ways that we are as God's sons and daughters, the ways that we can please God. And so Jesus reveals the closeness of God because he is the closeness of God. But in this revealing, in this revelation itself is a two-way street. God gives us the message through various ways, but we have to receive that message, not just hear it, but to truly listen, to take into our hearts and to act on it. And so the Good Samaritan in Jesus' parable is a wonderful example of one who hears, one who listens, one who takes to heart the message of God. He saw the robber's victim in the same way that the other two did. But the Good Samaritan, he dared to cross the street, to get close enough to him, to see his needs and to realize that he needed to respond. That reminds me of another story. This story took place in New York in the 1970s, late 60s, early 70s. This one woman, she lived in an apartment complex. And she was walking home from work one day, and it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and she was mugged on the streets. Very much so like the Good Samaritan, or rather like the victim in the Samaritan story today. But at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, in downtown New York, she was getting ready to go into her apartment room, her apartment complex. There was another apartment building right across the street. At 5 o'clock, people were sitting in their kitchen tables, eating dinner, looking out the window. And there were hundreds of witnesses to what had happened. She eventually died. And when they went back and they interviewed and asked, "How come you didn't call 911?" everybody's response was, "Well, I thought somebody else was going to do it." And she lost her life. You see, that Good Samaritan, he dared to cross the road. And he dared to hear and to be with the individual in need. You know, far too often, though, we can become overwhelmed easily by the many needs of the people in the world. But it's in many cases, though, that God is not asking us to go to the ends of the earth to respond to those in need. Often it's a brother or sister who is living nearby that has a special need that we can meet. For example, here at our parish, we have wonderful things available for everybody, like the cooperative care card that cares for those in need in the community. Our summer supply drive that was inspired by our youth recognizing a need in the community. All of these are like entering into the story of the Good Samaritan as we participate in them. And so the question really remains, do we have the courage of the Good Samaritan to approach others nearby, our brothers and sisters in need, to look into their face and to respond out of mercy and compassion? So if we can do that, then we truly are a neighbor to the one who needs it. And when we do that, we're fulfilling God's law, the law that he was asked of in the gospel today. What is the greatest? To put God first and to love your neighbor as yourself.